As Israel's longtime national spokesman to the foreign media, Superintendent Micky Rosenfeld is one of Israel's most recognizable officials and indeed the news industry's go-to guy for the unending cycle of breaking news. We invited Superintendent Rosenfeld to join us at the media line to meet the man rather than the crisis. Welcome, Micky Rosenfeld.
Thank you very much.
Unlike what most viewers are used to, Israel has a national police force rather than local law enforcement agencies in each of its cities. Apparently, that puts you on the job if something serious breaks anywhere in the country, not just the capital. How do you manage?
The Israeli National Police is unique in the way that it's one national police force. 24/7, our units are dealing with a number of different areas. First of all, counter-terrorism and preventing any attack that can take place, whether it's from the northern border, the Lebanese border, the Syrian border, or all the way down from the Jordanian border, heading back down to the south to Eilat and the Sinai region where there are constant threats. We have 29,000 police officers that are constantly patrolling, constantly preventing those terrorist attacks. And at the same time, increased criminal activity preventing internal issues such as regular crime, organized crime, illegal weapons, and regular police activity with the communities across Israel.
Have you seen an increase in any of these areas during the COVID-19 pandemic?
We have seen over the last first wave, which is more or less February, March, when we saw the COVID-19 hit Israel, we saw an increase in violence, an increase in protests, an increase in police activities at the same time when we dealt with, of course, hundreds of people that had been unfortunately confirmed with COVID-19. In the second wave that we're in at the moment, we're in the heart and the peak of the second wave, we're seeing a decrease in the numbers. And I think this is due to the fact that from the first wave and the second wave, we've changed our police tactics on the ground.
Fortunately for Israel, its police force must be tasked with issues of terrorism and national security, as well as what other countries would see as being traditional police work. What's the primary role of the police, and at what point do you tell inquiring reporters to take it up with the army?
Our responsibilities today in Israel are 80% carrying out police regular activities and 20% working on terrorism, which is very different to previous years in the second intifada, in the years up to 2010, where it was more or less 80% on counterterrorism and 20% on criminal-related issues. Things have changed. Today, the Israeli National Police Force is working much closer together with the community. We're responsible for every terrorist attack that happens inside Israel, every possible infiltration, whether it's from the borders or whether it's immediately from within inside any of the Palestinian areas where we've seen terrorist attacks. We have constant police operations and border police undercover operations that are taking place inside those specific areas to get to those terrorists before they can reach inside the heart of cities such as Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. And that is something that is taking place around the clock all the time, even though we're at the same period of dealing with COVID-19, working together with all the different communities, the Jewish communities, the Christian communities, the Muslim communities, and trying to work closely with the leaders, getting the message out.
Speaking of civil matters, the police have had its hands full with night after night political demonstrations expressing displeasure with the Prime Minister. With police under attack in the United States, how difficult is it for police to control such confrontations without becoming the issue?
Well, the Israeli police are a neutral organization. We receive requests, we permit those requests, and the protests are organized in full coordination with the Israeli National Police. So to give you an example, outside the Prime Minister's office, we mobilized over 1,000 police officers, including undercover units, undercover agents, in order to make sure that the protests would take place at that specific area. More than 15,000 people took part in those gatherings. We have to make sure that we're securing the protesters, but at the same time preventing anyone from attacking them. And therefore our units were both at the scene as well as carrying out operations, undercover operations, tracking individuals in other parts of Jerusalem to prevent them from making their way in those areas. And we made a number of counter arrests in order to prevent from any major incidents from happening. We have made 85 arrests of individuals who have caused public disturbances and unfortunately attacked police officers. at those protests which turned violent towards the end.
If citizen protesters do have issues with police at demonstrations, is there any recourse?
Well, first of all, we are making constant contact with the demonstrators. Our officers are on the ground patrolling the different areas, and we even gave out 200 masks, for example, to people who were at the demonstrations and did not keep to the specific rules and regulations, both of the Ministry of Health, the Israeli government rules, and of the Israeli National Police at the scene. If necessary, we remove individuals from the protests, and if necessary, we can also make arrests. But we've also given out fines to more than 150 people on one specific evening that we gave out to. But in general, we are seeing that the public is abiding to the specific rules and regulations of the Israeli National Police and the Ministry of Health.
The COVID-19 pandemic has obviously created new stresses and difficulties you haven't previously experienced. What's the worst part of it?
The worst scenario that could be for the Israeli police would be if our officers would have to go into isolation and they would be affected and confirmed positive with COVID-19, because then our officers wouldn't be able to serve the communities and the people and the public, and that is our main emphasis at the moment. So we're doing everything possible to make sure that our officers are safe, both in terms of their training, both in terms of police patrol. The social distance element is absolutely vital for their safety and the public safety.
How many officers have come down with COVID?
Until now, we've had over 100 officers confirmed with COVID, and we've had at peak periods more than 800 that have been in isolation. A large number of them already back to full police activities, and that's behind us. But we have to be super careful, both on the ground as well as the officers.
Micky, early on, during the corona outbreak, police bore the brunt of jokes about chasing down citizens not wearing masks rather than chasing criminals. Was that a fair characterization?
I don't think so. And I'll tell you why. Because our officers are there in order to be in public places, train stations, malls, bus stations, on the beach areas. We're making sure that if someone is not wearing a mask, which is absolutely, this is the new laws. You have to wear a mask today. You cannot walk out in the street without wearing a mask. For example, in Europe and the United States, where it's optional, for example, in the States. Here, it is something which is absolutely necessary by law. What we will do is we will implement the law, explain first of all to the people and to the public the importance of covering their mouths, covering their nose. It's absolutely essential. The importance of social distancing is what is preventing a much more major crisis from taking place here in Israel. Let's not forget that in Israel more than 500 people have already died from the COVID-19, and we've had thousands that have been affected, and unfortunately the numbers are going up, more than 500 to 1,000 per day, which is still relatively high.
Micky, in speaking about Israel at large, you've had hotspots, the ultra-Orthodox community, the Israeli Arab community. What is being done right?
What's being done correctly is that the areas have been on lockdown, on shutdown, those red zones which we've mapped out geographically. We've mobilized units in the different areas to make sure that no one can come in and no one can come out unless absolutely necessary, and we prevented the spread. I think that is what is being done correctly. What has not been done correctly is that we have seen there has not been enough coordination between the leaders of those communities. For example, we've had problems within the ultra-religious Jewish neighborhoods where we've spoken to the rabbis and we've asked the rabbis to try and explain to people to keep social distancing, but until it reaches on the ground within inside the communities and within inside the neighborhoods, the channels of communication are not exactly 100% open, and I think that is due to the fact that not everybody has a mobile phone. They are very closed environments. The families live very distant from one another.
What has Israel done in terms of the foreign workers here in Israel? And is this something that could end up a catastrophe that is unseen?
That's something that we've also emphasized, especially in the area of South Tel Aviv, where there are a lot of foreign workers, both from the Philippines and African countries. We're coordinating with social organizations. A lot of people are illegal workers, so they don't want to come forth to the authorities and talk and explain. So we've increased the patrols around those areas.
They're living sometimes 6 and 8 in a room.
That's correct. That is the same social problem that exists, for example, within the ultra-religious Haredi community, where you have families of 8 to 10 children all living in a 3-bedroom apartment. If they're in a good situation, they'll be living in a 3-bedroom apartment.
What should they know better than to ask?
But I can also add and explain that the Israeli National Police have implemented over the last 3 years and are using more than 10,000 cameras on our police officers who are patrolling the streets. Every officer who is involved in making contact or engaging with the public has a camera on him. Everything is recorded and all the information is downloaded, both in order to understand what has taken place at the scene and how the public and the certain individual has reacted, as well as to see the police behavior.
Over the years, Israel's law enforcement echelon has shared its expertise with police departments worldwide. Recently, as the unrest in the U.S. focused on police, we've heard suggestions that Israel shared bad habits with their American counterparts. First of all, is that true? And tell us what Israeli police share with foreign agencies.
The Israeli National Police have been sharing information, knowledge, and experience with American organizations, counter-terrorist organizations, law enforcement, as well as European, for decades. This is something that began after 9/11 and has increased over the years. We are sharing our experience, how the chain of command and operations from the police headquarters, we have the operations, the intelligence is transferred to the last of our officers on the ground, and therefore we're capable of succeeding and preventing those major terrorist attacks. So in general, we're sharing information, we're sharing intelligence, we train together in the field of counterterrorism, because that is in fact the highlight, the most important perspective of the joint ongoing relationships with the different organizations. And I think that what has been said over the last few months by anti-Israel, anti-American, BDS movements across America is incorrect, taken out of proportion, is an attempt to use ongoing relationships and strengthening our constant operations and intelligence and information that we transfer. They are attempting to cause damage and prevent that from taking place.
The pushback since George Floyd was killed has been enormous in terms of the police. We've never seen anything like that in the United States in a very, very long time. What's your advice to your fellow police?
I would personally say to the officers and the organizations overseas, continue to believe in what you are doing. Make sure that you maintain the exact guidelines, laws and regulations that there are, of course, on police officers and law enforcement, in the same way as there are here in Israel. No officers should ever cross that line. The public have to realize that people are serving day and night, 24/7, are not seeing their families, are not seeing their children, and everything they are doing in order to support the public. It's for the public. And I've spoken to officers who have saved many lives, who have encountered in numerous scenarios that we would never want to even confront. Saving children, car crashes, fires, counter-terrorism, making arrests, officers that have been shot and injured and have gone back to duty. Those are the same officers in America that are dealing with the same issues here in Israel. And therefore officers have to be strong. And I'm hoping, and we're hoping, that the public will go back to the way it was and will look ahead in the long term and continue to respect the law enforcement in America.
The public has seen mixed messaging, sometimes lack of a chain of command of understanding how messages should go down, a concerted effort amongst different organizations working together, whether it's the government, the police, foreign ministry. This happens both in the United States and what we see in Israel as well. Where does it break down, and how can it be done better?
Here in Israel, the Israeli police is part of the chain of the Israeli government. We know and we understand that the government and the different organizations are sitting down and talking and discussing, and we're in a snowball effect of a situation of COVID-19, of what is happening, of what is changing. The scenarios of yesterday are different to the scenarios of tomorrow. The scenarios of tomorrow are going to be different for the next couple of weeks. And therefore, once the chain of command and the understanding and the language, we talk the same language, we will be able to implement even better the new rules and regulations in terms of dealing with and preventing COVID-19. It doesn't take 3 to 4 days to implement a decision. The decisions can be implemented within half an hour, within an hour. If necessary to close off neighborhoods, we can do that within 1 hour, 45 minutes, a complete lockdown and a complete shutdown. It all depends on, number one, the government decisions, which are based on assessments, and of course, numbers and statistics and graphs and information that the government has access to.
How does Micky Rosenfeld prevent the job from becoming personally overwhelming?
I served in the Yamam, the Israeli National Police counterterrorism unit, for 9 years. I was on the front lines working and engaging, making arrests and engaging with terrorists for many years. I think that the experience that I gained there gives me the background and the confidence to deal with any given situation that can take place anytime, any place and anywhere. And I think that is something very positive that is part of me, part of my personality. But of course, one mustn't take anything personal, especially when you arrive at different scenes, which can be complicated, can be difficult, when you see people that unfortunately have been injured or killed, whether it's criminal, whether it's terrorist related. One must try and put your emotions to the side and deal with the situation. When you go home, when you're after the situation, you have to know that you're ready for the next call, which is going to come. It's just a matter of time. And therefore, it's very important to be focused at all times. And that's the way I function, and I'm very proud to be part of the Israeli National Police in the present position.
What secrets do you have for coping with the continuous stress?
I think it's something that is what I have from inside. It's something that it's within inside your personality. I left England, moved to Israel for Zionistic reasons, to serve the country. Served in the IDF in infantry, served in the most dangerous and complicated unit in the Israeli National Police, one specific unit. Have served many years in the scene, many years on different sites, and that is something that is part of, I think, something that maybe if I look back into previous generations, I have received from my grandmother, who was an Auschwitz survivor, received that from my mother, received that from my parents, and that is something that no doubt I continue to give to my children as well.
What secrets do you have for coping with this kind of stress?
Succeeding in saving lives. When I knew that I would come home after a successful counter-terrorist operation and we either arrested or engaged terrorists, knowing that hundreds of people were now surviving due to the fact that that terrorist was stopped and that explosion didn't take place or that shooting attack didn't happen. And I think those were my key and most important moments that I felt that I was serving the country throughout the years.
Superintendent Micky Rosenfeld, the face of the police to the international press and the world, thank you for joining us here at the Media Line.